again, everyone. Welcome to Calamasa Insider. I am Will Coble, City Manager for the City of Calamasa. We are so glad to have you on board this week. We've got probably a shorter show today that we're going to bring to you today. We're going to talk about a little bit about what happened at our last council meeting. There is one thing that I forgot to mention that was on the agenda last week. That was a business item, so we'll talk about that a little bit. We're also going to talk about this Monday's council meeting, the special meeting we're having on September 23rd. Originally was scheduled for the continuation of the Oak Valley North public hearing that will still take place, but I'm going to explain to you what's happening with that. There will be no decision made on that, so I'll explain why. And finally, I'm going to talk about a team building event that our executive team did this past Wednesday. I just want to talk a little bit about that and some of the things that we learned. But also, when an organization or a governmental organization does that kind of thing, how is that valuable to the taxpayer? And I think I'm going to try to make that nexus as to why it is important for the taxpayer. But before we get into all of that, I just want to give a shout out to the NewsMirror. They actually used our podcast from a couple of weeks ago to add some context to an article that they wrote, and they quoted me in the article from the podcast, and I thought it added a lot of good information and context. So I do appreciate the NewsMirror's use of the podcast. It was the first time we've been mentioned in the NewsMirror, so that was pretty cool. So to see that and to know that this program is making a difference in the community and how we communicate with the public, and hopefully it did actually bring people to the show. So if you're listening as a result of seeing that article, being made aware of the podcast, I welcome you as a new listener. I hope that you'll keep listening. You know, if you want to make sure you get the latest and greatest episode without missing one, sign up on your favorite podcast app, or catch us on YouTube, youtube.com/@CalamasaInsider, and you can listen to us there as well. So let's get into what happened at our council meeting this past Monday. The council adopted the increased notice requirements for public hearings. It increased the radius for if we're talking about a project site, it increased the radius from 300 feet around that project to now 600 feet. And the project applicant must also place a sign advertising the public notice or the notice of public hearing on the subject property. So that way it'll give additional ways for people to know when a subject property is up for a discussion and possible approval for entitlements. So an important development there. Council approved that unanimously. The council did defer the decision, however, about funding for the senior meal program to this coming Monday's meeting to ensure participation by all council members. So 2 were absent from the last meeting. We only had Councilmember Manley, Councilmember Cervantes, and Mayor Pro Tem Hewitt at the meeting on Monday. And so it was, Councilmember Manley made the motion to continue the items so that Mayor Davis and Councilmember Molina may also participate in the discussion. One thing that I didn't mention last week that was on the agenda, and I can't believe I missed this one, is our update to our reserve policy, our city's reserve policy. So we did have an existing policy that basically just designated a discretionary reserve and a equipment and vehicle reserve. And we kept those, and then we expanded upon them. So one thing, they did adopt staff's recommendation to expand upon our reserve policy to encompass compensated absences, our capital improvement program, and information technology. And compensated absences, if you don't know what that is, it's basically the dollar value of the absences. So like vacation time, when you accumulate vacation time, at the time you terminate, for example, you're supposed to be paid out the value of that vacation time. So anything that people are entitled to that they basically keep on the books, that if they left the city, if they retired from the city, and they would get that paid out to them, that was considered compensated absences. So we're creating a reserve based on the value of that accumulated dollar amount for all employees, so that if someone does retire, we do have a pool of funds available to pay out, rather than having, because it could be significant, especially if it's like a city manager, for example, or somebody that's been with the city for a long time and allowed their balances to accumulate. So we want to have something to draw upon in case that, because that could become a pretty significant expense, a one-time expense. And so having funds set aside for that event is helpful. So that's what that is. We also want to make sure our capital improvement program and information technology investments are able to go forward even in times of downturn. So if we don't have money to put aside necessarily for them, we still have something to draw upon to continue projects or to continue our program so that we don't fall behind on those type of things. We haven't had that luxury of having these type of reserves in the past, but financial prudence over the last decade or so, plus new development, has allowed us to accumulate reserves that are adequate to be able to fund all these different types of reserves, so that we want to make sure going forward that they are protected, that those funds are protected, and so that we can actually have programs that will allow us to continue those things that we're doing and not fall behind. We also provided guidance for setting additional discretionary reserves. So after all those required reserves are funded and there's money left over, the council may decide that, well, for example, in fiscal year 23-24, they designated a Parks and Trails reserve, and so they set money aside for that purpose. And so there could be other types of reserves that the council may want to consider in the future. So there is a mechanism for that within the reserve policy, but ensuring that those required policies or required reserves are funded first. So again, we did keep the existing reserves, the contingency reserve of 30% and 5% of expenditures for vehicle and equipment replacement. However, we did set minimum thresholds before those percentages can be adjusted. So, as the city grows, as the city gets bigger, the percentage that's needed as a percentage of operating expenses maybe goes down a little bit. You don't need to have, like, the smaller you are, the higher that reserve needs to be, because you could still have big expenses for emergencies, contingencies, things like that could be similar size to a bigger city than you. So what that means is you have to put more money aside as a percentage of your budget. But as you grow, you still need to have a solid number, but that as a percentage it could lower. So we set basically a minimum threshold of $5 million. Once 30% represents $5 million for our reserves, then that percentage can be adjusted down. But we want to get to that $5 million reserve target first before that 30% is adjusted. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but it's just trying to be prudent so that we make sure we have adequate funds set aside for emergencies. So now shifting gears to this coming Monday's council meeting. So again, remember, this was originally for the Oak Valley North hearing, but because we continue that item for the senior meal program, we're also going to consider that as well. So again, this will provide additional funding as a bridge to get us through December for the existing program, because we're kind of hit both this last minute. And so we want to at least have some time to make sure we make a good decision on what we're going to do with the program going forward, whether we're going to continue to fund it, whether we can identify outside funding that will help us continue to fund it, or whether we need to go in a different direction. So there's different options there, and that's kind of what we're considering at this point. So now back to the original reason for this meeting, which was the continuation of Oak Valley North. We did have two developments in this project over the last week. We did receive guidance from the FPPC because, as you recall, when we had the meeting on October 19th, the reason that we continued it then was so that we could seek the FPPC guidance on that hearing to see whether or not Mayor Davis and Mayor Pro Tem Hewitt could participate. Well, they did find that both of them do indeed have a conflict of interest due to how close they live to the project, so they cannot participate in the decision on the development. So that's number one. Number two, the applicant has requested that the hearing be continued to a date uncertain. So what this means is that I'll get to that in a second. Staff is recommending that the city council grant this request, but the applicant will be at the meeting on Monday to formally request the continuance from the city council. So that's number one. So what does that mean? If you attended the first hearing on the project on August 19th, you'll recall that we stated that individual members of the public had a choice to speak either that night or at the continued hearing on September 23rd, but not both, because it's all part of the same record. So this is just, we're basically picking up exactly where we left off on the August 19th as far as the administrative record. So the administrative record for August 19th and the hearing continued on September 23rd are all part of the same administrative record. And you have only one opportunity to speak on that administrative record. Since this continuance being requested is to a date uncertain, that means it will have to be renoticed whenever it occurs. And by the way, because of the new rules we just passed this last Monday regarding new, public hearing notification requirements, depending on the timing of when they want to come back to have that discussion, they would be subject to these new requirements if they want to renotice the public hearing. But since it's being renoticed, it will be treated as a new public hearing, a new administrative record. Therefore, members of the public that want to speak on the project on the 23rd will be able to do so. So this coming Monday, and you'll also be able to speak on the project again when it comes in front of the council in the future. Now, again, because we're kind of closing the administrative record on this without a decision being made, those comments really won't have any relevance on the administrative record on the next hearing. So that's the difference. When we continued it to a date certain, there's no renoticing requirement, and it all continues as part of the administrative record, because we identified at the hearing, we told exactly people, okay, this is when we're going to have the next part of this hearing. Now, since this is not a date certain, it has to be renoticed, because the audience members that are there for that public hearing won't know unless we tell them. Since they were there on the 19th, we told them that we're going to have it on the September 23rd. So therefore, it's treated a little bit differently. So I hope that's a little bit of a nuance, but I hope that makes sense. So the next question might be, does the city, because again, this is being requested by the applicant, does the city council have to continue the item? And technically they don't. However, the staff report is not being presented with any exhibits or resolutions, so there's nothing there for their consideration. So at the very least, if they wanted to, they could direct staff to come back with the necessary documents to allow any decision they would want to make. So let's say, you know what, we don't want to do this thing. We're giving up on it. We just want to make a decision. Staff, we're directing you to prepare a resolution rejecting the project or whatever, right? They could do that, but because the hearing is partially to satisfy the due process obligations the city has to the applicant under the United States Constitution, the practice is usually that you grant the continuance to give the opportunity for the applicant to, quote unquote, present their case, so to speak. And so just to clarify, the applicant's right to due process is simply to allow them to state their case again. But since this is a discretionary action, the city council has the right to decide on their application any way they wish. But they have to be given the ability to present their project. They're technically giving that ability, but since we got that request, it's a huge time burden to put together all the presentations. We kind of have it all, but it was still going through legal review, and they were going to still have to spend more time on it. Not to mention the thousands of pages that this packet would be, and it does put a lot of burden on the city clerk's office and things like that. So if we know that items being requested to be continued by the applicant, and they're kind of the one driving the process, because if we start driving the process, then it becomes a city project. And this is, as I said before, this is applicant driven. So we want to make sure that it stays that way, and therefore we are likely to recommend that continuance, and which is what we are doing. So if you see the packet's out, it's out there for public review. It's available on our website. You can look at that, and you'll see that we are putting on the record that we are requesting a continuance. The only thing that's included are all of the public feedback that we've received up to the date of when the agenda packet was published, as well as the speaker cards for those that had filled out speaker cards at the last meeting. So again, those speaker cards will be at the September 23rd hearing, and they will be called to speak, and they can speak or they cannot speak. That will not have any impact on the future of their ability to speak in the future. So you can speak on the 23rd without forfeiting any right to speak again on the item when it comes forward in the future. But with no administrative record upon which to make a decision, the city council will not make a final decision on this project on Monday. So I hope that's clear enough for everyone so that they can make the decision of whether or not they want to attend the meeting on Monday. If you listen to this podcast, obviously if you listen to this podcast, you're hearing this, and know of friends and neighbors that are interested in this item, please let them know about this so that, if they're having to make special arrangements to come to this meeting, I don't want them to waste their time. It doesn't mean that they can't come. They still can come. There's still any meeting of the city council, the public's welcome to come to, but I don't want people to make special arrangements to come to a meeting that they think there's a decision going to be made and then no decision's made. So I don't want to waste their time because we value the public's time and we respect the public's time. So we don't want people to show up unnecessarily and be disappointed again. So, have them listen to this project so that they can hear firsthand. Listen to this podcast so they can hear firsthand why this is happening, what the procedure is going to be. But again, if they want to come and speak on this item, they'll be welcome to do so. And there's no consequence on the future in terms of if they want to speak on it again when it comes forward, whenever it comes forward, because we don't know when or even if, there's a possibility it doesn't come back at all. But likely it probably will. I would imagine that, an applicant that's gotten this far, they're not just going to walk away and say, never mind, type of thing. So the likelihood is that it will come forward in the future. I just don't know when at this point. Okay, so want to talk about this team building that we did. So this past Wednesday, the city executive team did an off-site all-day team building meeting, which was facilitated by Jacob Green of Jacob Green and Associates. He does this type of thing for governmental agencies all over the state. And he actually used to work in government. He used to be on kind of our side of the table, so to speak. And as I've mentioned many times on this podcast, we have a small city staff. So the executive team does constitute a much bigger portion of our overall staff than most cities do. Okay. But one of the most important things that I can do as a leader is invest in my team to ensure that they're fulfilled in what they do and that we create an environment where communication is encouraged and valued and staff is empowered to work together to solve problems. Because sometimes there could be a problem that the fire chief is having that maybe a conversation with the planning director would help clarify, even if the planning director is not involved with it. But maybe her background and her experience and her way of thinking could maybe help the chief with a blind spot. I certainly recognize that I have plenty of blind spots and I rely on the team as a whole. And I'll talk to different members of the team about different things that maybe not even are part of their job because they may go, well, have you thought about this? And I go, you know what? I didn't. That's a good point. I should think about that. So I'm very open to that kind of thing. And so a lot of it was about how we unlock our abilities to do that. So, but I think that's huge. That's important to invest in people. But as for you as a taxpayer or you as a business owner, what's in that for you? What does that do for you? So in any business, doesn't matter, public, private, doesn't matter. Anybody that's worked it's been a manager or owned a business or even just worked anywhere, I think really, if it comes down to it, dysfunction in the workplace leads to lower productivity and high turnover. And those are both things that will kill performance, right? If you have low productivity, people aren't engaged, you're not going to get as much done because they're only going to do the minimum, or maybe even not that, right? High turnover, obviously, knowledge, institutional knowledge is a powerful thing. And so when you have high turnover, you have to spend time bringing people up to speed, and then you lose a lot of time and energy on that, right? And you lose a lot of expertise that you might have had before. And so this is no different in government. And I would in fact argue that because of the reason people get into government, they want to serve the community. That's a lot of reasons, they want to make the world a better place, right? There is a lot of that. It sounds corny, but there actually is a lot of that about why people get into government. This concept, this trying to make sure that there's not dysfunction in the workplace becomes even more important, because government work is so unique, since there's a lot of nuance into what success looks like. So if you take a for-profit business, it doesn't matter whether you're a plumber or an accountant or a lawyer or anything else, right? If you're owning a business, your goal is profit. And so that's your measure. That's a large part of your measure of success, right? Because if that's not what you're doing, then go work for a nonprofit, right? So the goal is to try to maximize revenue, minimize costs to make the business profitable. And you can measure that, right? Government is not only a not-for-profit entity, but the value that people get from government is measured in many different ways. And what people value is different. And some people may even laugh at me using the terms value and government together. And this speaks to the diversity of thought and opinion on our function from one person to the next. So we have a high-performing executive team to begin with. So this was not a function of trying to fix a problem. And our facilitator put it best. Even the best running car, the best running engine needs maintenance. And if you don't maintain it properly, it will not always do that. So this was an investment in our team to take them to the next level of performance and satisfaction in their job. This in turn, I believe, helps us work better at serving our public, which is really our entire purpose. That's why I see something like this as not only investment in our people, but it's also an investment in our public, in our community. Okay. One thing that really resonated, I think, with the group. So at the end of the day, Jacob went around and asked each team member, what are 2 nuggets that you got from today? Because he gave us a nugget worksheet at the beginning of the day and asked us to write down things that really kind of resonated with us and what some nuggets that we're going to take from the day that we're going to be able to really put into use. That was a powerful thing for us. And one common theme was this concept of cognitive diversity. And so we all did an assessment beforehand that measured how we think. And it was plotted onto a 3D chart. And we got to see where each of us was relative to one another on the chart. And this gave us insight as to what gaps we may have in how we think. So if we have a problem that we're trying to solve and we're struggling to solve it, we may need to find people that think in those spaces that, in those spaces that we're missing to maybe get some new, fresh ideas. So at the very least, what it does is it shows us where our blind spots are and helps us figure out in what ways we may need to think differently. And I'm going to get a report of everybody's as a group, and it'll talk to me about it. It will share with me how the group dynamic works in terms of how we think and how we can maybe fill in some of the gaps that we may have. That doesn't mean we get rid of somebody and put someone else in. But what it does mean is that when we have the opportunity to add a team member, because someone retires or something like that, we have another way to look at how we're going to fill that spot. Also, what it does is that it encourages us to expand outside of our executive team bubble, so to speak, and maybe seek out the opinions of different people in the office, our guys in the field, our firefighters, things like that, that maybe it's a problem that's completely outside of their department, but because they may think differently or have a different perspective, they may be able to see something that we're not seeing that maybe helps us. That's the key to solving that problem. So it really communicated us the importance of collectively thinking about a problem and opening up the problem possibly to a bigger group to think about different ways to solve it. So that concept in and of itself is not new, but it helped us realize just how important that is. Because I think sometimes when we get into the daily grind, you kind of forget about those kind of things. And sometimes if we're having problem solving issues, and we have problems that the community is like, why aren't you doing anything about this? And it's not like we're not thinking about it. We're probably thinking about it way more than you are. But now we're opening our minds to maybe taking a step back and going, wait a minute, what if we were to get a bigger group of people within the organization to talk about it? Now, it's still not a big group, but I still think that we have enough brain power and enough diversity, cognitive diversity on our team, on our city team as a whole, that we need to really think about what this concept means to us and how we put it into use. So overall, it was just such a powerful day that was worthwhile for our entire group. And I'm excited to put the ideas and concepts we learned into action, which I really believe will have the effect of serving the public even better. And that really is, again, what our underlying goal is. That is our purpose. So I want to thank Jacob for his work with us on Wednesday. It went way, way better than I thought it would. It was just kind of one of those, I thought we needed a tune-up. And I think that I still believe that we're a great performing organization, but we still got some powerful tools to really take us to the next level. And I'm excited for our entire team. They're excited for it. And so I think you're going to see, I really think long-term, you're going to see results for the community. So with that, I want to wrap up this week's show. The next city council meeting, again, is this Monday, September 23rd at 6 p.m. at the Norton Young Senior Center. You can attend in person or watch on the city's YouTube page by going to cityofcalamasa.net/YouTube, then clicking on the live tab. Again, as I stated earlier, the Oak Valley North public hearing was continued to this meeting, but the applicant is seeking a continuance, so a presentation of the project will not be given and a decision will not be made at this point. Our State of the City, hosted by the Calamasa Chamber of Commerce, will take place this Thursday, September 26th, starting at 11:30 a.m. at the Plantation on the Lake Recreation Center, located at 10961 Desert Lawn Drive, right here in Calamasa. Tickets can be still purchased at calamasachamber.events, but we're getting close to the deadline, so you may need to call the Chamber of Commerce if you want to still get in. Next week's podcast will be an encore of my presentation at the event, and I will do my best for the YouTube version to sync up with the PowerPoint, so we'll see how that goes. It'll be the first time I've done that, so we'll see how that goes. But anyway, so this is the Calamasa Insider Podcast. I am Will Coble, and we will talk to you again next week. Have a great weekend.